Even as I, Brock Gordon, was heading to my next assignment, I was asking myself why I had agreed to accept this assignment. I think the main reasons were that I wanted to forget my ex-wife and the money was good. In addition, I have been told over and over again that this is a patriotic act and will benefit national security, indeed, the international security of all Western countries, more than any other thing I could do. So I had the perfect background for this job. I work for a corporation that has contracts with Western governments for covert activities. My special area of expertise is the protection and analysis of electronic data of terrorists and other potential enemies in order to prevent attacks. Although I am only 31 years old, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the United States, a master's degree in infrastructure protection and international security from Carleton University in Canada, and a PhD in strategy and security from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. The work was supposed to last about a year, the estimated time it would take to do what was needed in a remote location in British Columbia, Canada. Most of the employees were American, Canadian, British, and German military personnel. Although there were several other private contractors, there were about 30 employees. In total, 20 of whom had higher education and real-world experience in security issues, especially in the fight against terrorism. The technological equipment was equipped with the latest technology. Since the entire program was secret, workers who had wives, there were no married female workers, and even children took them with them. No one has ever worn a uniform. The facility, as far as the neighbors, about 2,100 local residents, knew, was intended for Bitcoin mining. Although if any of them had really studied the situation, no one did this in my time. They would have seen that the facility does not consume as much electricity as when mining Bitcoins, and at the same time it did not make much noise. Although in the literature about this institution, it was said that the reason for the relative silence in the institution was an advanced sound, one technology that had never been used before. All employees worked alternately, so that at least 7 people always worked at the facility. Most of the employees were very friendly, and we often had 10 or 12 families at a time. There has been no attempt to ostracize single people, men or women, like me. After about a month of work, I got involved in the job, and I felt it was worth it, and we made progress and had already prevented one terrorist attack in the UK. However, I noticed that most of the 14 wives present seemed bored, although they had a social club and a gym for sports, and those with children as well, as some without children helped at a local elementary school with insufficient staff. They did not have the opportunity to work or receive significant satisfaction despite movie nights and parties. There was one thing I didn't like about this situation. Actually, that's an understatement. There was one thing about this situation that was maddening. There was not a single woman who attracted me. The unmarried women who worked with us were very competent and intelligent people, but I was not interested in them because they were plain or frankly ugly. I was very friendly with them, but I didn't feel any attraction to them. Among the approximately 1,100 townspeople, there was also not a single unmarried woman who scored more than 5 points on a 10-point scale. It seems that all decent and attractive single women have moved to Vancouver or another major city, although some did marry local guys. Due to the remoteness of the place and the length of the working day, it was not possible to get the opportunity to travel unless someone had 4 days off in a row, which rarely, if at all, happened. Considering my situation with my ex-wife and the need for camaraderie among colleagues, I wasn't going to chase after their wives. None of the wives dressed provocatively because it was the wrong place, although during the first month, I actually saw half of them in the gym when I was training, and those I saw had good figures. In fact, I was embarrassed to be following this. Of the 14 wives, I would say that all had faces at 7 points or higher on a 10-point scale and bodies, as far as it could be determined, since there were no bikini competitions, at least 8 points. After about 6 weeks of my work in a remote part of British Columbia, I had a very good day. I was almost solely responsible for the investigation of the terrorist attack in Toronto, which The Canadian authorities quickly stopped, but when I got to my small detached house around 10 p.m., for some reason, the lack of love making strongly hooked me. Apart from the usual unwanted requests and a few short notes from friends and relatives, there was one with an unusual name. I would have thought it might be typical harassment if the name dash mysterious local girls hadn't intrigued me. I clicked on it. Of course, I would never have clicked on the attachment, a sure way to infect your computer with a virus, and obviously the author of the email understood this because all the information was in the body of the email. There were 6 photos. They all had frontal shots of naked women with masks on their faces and similar blonde wigs. The words were straightforward. Local mysterious girls are available for the right man. He must be single and know how to please a woman. Pleasant satisfaction must be mutual. The following options are available next week for the girl in the app photos. The price is agreed before the services are provided. Our girls do not show their faces and do not reveal their identity, do not flirt, and do not talk much, but they like to make love and moan. Fill out the form without names. This was followed by photographs with dates and times. An example is the girl in photo D, Monday, April 12th, 1 or more hours from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Thursday, April 15th, 1 or more hours from 7 p.m. to midnight. The only thing required in the questionnaire was the applicant's address, the price range, her letter, the date and time of the connection, the desired amount of time. I thought for at least half an hour, looking at the photos carefully and going over in my mind whether it was a fake, a joke, a potential disaster, or a way to shave off my horns. What made me answer was the fact that my bolt was as hard as a board. As far as I could tell from the relatively small photos, from my taste, the women in photos A, D, and F had a build from 9 to 10, and the women in photos B, C, and E had a build from 8 to 9. In other words, they all matched my needs to the highest degree. The girl in photo D had the date and time that suited me the most. I specified $100 per hour plus as the price range, and I specified 2 hours as the amount of time. If the woman in photo D had been even close to as good-looking and interested as she seemed, I probably would have paid $1,000 an hour. I was well paid, and I had nothing to spend my money on, so money was not taken into account. With my last breath, I closed my eyes and clicked on the send icon. I really had to play with myself to lighten my blue balls, but I got a very good night's sleep dreaming about how to use D. The next morning, when I got up and checked my computer, I was surprised to see the answer. The girl in photo D is available for 2 hours on April 14th from 10 p.m. to midnight. $100 per hour, cash only, condoms are needed. Click on the icon to accept. I read it twice, clicked on the icon, and couldn't wait for Wednesday evening to make sure it was real. It was hard to finish work on Wednesday. Thinking about that night, I had so many questions in my head. Where did this girl come from? Did she really look like in the photo? Would it be some kind of stupid joke? Etc. Finally, I concentrated enough to finish my work and returned home by 8 p.m. to take a shower, clean up order in the house. I'm obsessed with cleanliness, and it didn't take much, including changing the sheets on my bed and taking a nap. I couldn't believe it when there was a knock on my back door at 9:58 a.m. I looked outside without turning on the outdoor overhead light and saw what undoubtedly looked like a woman about 5 feet 6 inches, 168 centimeters, tall in a cape, under which there was something like long-sleeved sweatpants. I opened the door and the woman quickly entered my house and then pulled down the curtains, covering the windows in the door. She took off all her clothes, exposing a body that really looked like in photo D, except that the mink had sparse pubic hair instead of being shaved like in the photo. Her mask wasn't cute, but it wasn't creepy either, and her blonde wig seemed to be tightly glued. In a hoarse, obviously mechanically altered voice, she said, "Please put $200 in my fanny pack and then take me to your bedroom." I did as I was told and quickly undressed. I was wearing only sweatpants and a t-shirt as soon as I entered the bedroom. She stared at my hard one for a good 15 or 20 seconds, then asked, "Do you have Magnum condoms?" "Of course," I replied, holding out a box of 12 pieces. Kissing on the lips was impossible because of her mask, but she wasted no time caressing my testicles and playing with the foreskin on the bolt. "Uncircumcised, I like it," she moaned, playing with my foreskin as I caressed with my fingers and sucked on the ball, which, according to my estimates, was round like a cup of tea. It wasn't long before we moved from a standing position to a lying position on my clean sheets. I expected, given the mutual comment in the email, that I would get a good review and be able to call Dee again to have a good time if I licked her, something I always liked to do anyway, unless it smelled like fish 3 days ago. Dee's mink, I called it Dee, was clean and fragrant. After I brought her to 2 quick pleasures with my fingers, I pulled the condom over my bolt, which looked like a steel rod, and entered her. She wasn't very tight, but she was definitely tight enough for great lovemaking. After I was completely submerged, even though she was lubricated, it still took a minute or two to fully submerge my rod without harming her. She turned into a wild woman. The way she moved her pelvis, clenched and unclenched her PC muscles. It was like it was the most important thing in the world for her. Dee was so damn active in intercourse that I finished faster than ever before by putting on a condom. This didn't seem to bother her, as she also seemed to have almost completely finished. With Mia, lest she was a great actress. We both lay panting, exhausted, and despite the relative rapidity of our copulation, our bodies glistened with sweat. When we seemed to come to our senses almost simultaneously, I pulled the half-hard one out of the sweet mink. I could see her eyes through the mask, and they were dancing. It was amazing, just amazing. I smiled. "Is it worth $100 an hour?" "What is it?" she asked in her mechanical voice. "It costs $10,000, but $100 is all I can afford." I smiled again. Her eyes danced even harder. Then she said, "If you promise not to try to look me in the face, I'll take off my mask and suck you off to get ready for the second round. The best offer I've received in recent years." She took off my condom, making sure that she was stimulating my bolt, tied it, and skillfully threw it into the trash can in my room. "Are you Caitlin Clark?" I asked, comparing her masterful shot to the most productive women's college basketball player in the United States. She giggled at that, laid me on my back, and said, "Look straight up, not at me." I couldn't see, but I felt her lift her mask slightly, and her lips caressed me. Her lips were strong, and she was massaging me. It wasn't long before I groaned, and my bolt became hard again, the fastest recovery I could remember. Hard out due to the fact that I hadn't had love in a long time, and also because Dee was experienced with an obvious enthusiasm for love and with a first-class body. As soon as my bolt was as hard as a rock again, Dee sat up and slowly planted her mink on my bolt. When I looked up, her mask was back in place. She rode me like a rented mule while I tormented her, even though it hadn't been that long since I finished because of her skillful riding. As soon as she started pulsing her PC muscles again, I ended up like extinguished Roman candle. She screamed in ecstasy and collapsed on top of me. While we both continued to kick until we were completely exhausted, I think we both either fell asleep or were just out of our minds for at least the next 10 minutes while Dee was lying on my chest with her balls buried in it. When full clarity returned to me, I noticed that my hands were unconsciously lightly stroking her sides, and one of her hands was gently squeezing my neck. I rolled Dee off me, and only then did my bolt completely come out of her. I thought something was wrong, and it was confirmed when I heard Dee say, "Oh shit." Dee slapped her hand on her forehead under the mask and muttered, "Wow, how terrible I am. I didn't even remember to put on a condom." "I'm sorry," I replied. "I didn't realize it until now. I have to say that although I had no intention of making love without a condom, this time was amazing." Dee seemed to really like the compliments, so I gave her more and more. They were all true, not just blowing smoke. Even though Dee seemed a little uncomfortable talking in her altered voice, we had a very pleasant conversation in bed while I was playing with her balls, something she seemed to like, too. Eventually, she started massaging my balls again, and to our mutual surprise, my friend came to life again. Was this thing really ready for the next round? She giggled at least. As far as I could tell, it was a chuckle. He really likes you. I smiled, reaching for another condom. Forget about the Magnum, she said, playing with my foreskin. The damage has already been done, so we can get the most out of it. How about a doggy? I love the dog, so I didn't argue. When I stroked her, I realized that I shouldn't have focused only on her amazing front. Her ass was world class. Any lack of diligence I might have had disappeared when I ran my hands over her buttocks, and she moaned. After I entered her, I tugged at her with one hand, and with the other I stroked her buttock, then buried my thumb in her rosebud. Just before I was ready to finish, and we finished at the same time, like jet planes. Taking off. It was 12:30 when we got out of the shower together, and she got dressed. I'm sorry it took more than 2 hours, I told her. I don't. She laughed at least. I think it was a laugh. It was the most fun I've had in years, she said. Actually, if you decide to use my services again, just get an STD report and pay $50 an hour, and we can meet as often as you want, and without condoms. I stared into her eyes. I wish I could kiss you on the lips, I growled. Maybe someday, she replied, stroking my cheek. For the first time since I arrived in British Columbia, I fell asleep a completely satisfied and happy person. Visions of Dee's body and our outstanding bond played pleasantly through my mind. After my experience with Dee, in order, since that was when my schedules matched the opportunities they noted in the revised email I received each week, you see, A, F, B, and E. They were all very different from each other, but each was fun in its own way. Curly had at least teardrop-shaped balls DD, C had cup-shaped asymmetrical ones. F was tall, C and E were low. F and C had very tight minks, B had relatively loose, but still desirable. A, B, and C were suitable only for one or more two love-making sessions in 2 hours. E and F seemed like they could go on all night. What they all had in common was tension. Considering what Dee told me when she left my house, I listed $50 an hour and 2-hour sessions as my price and time, without any backlash. Everyone seemed to be happy with this arrangement. In short, all 6 of them were great. Although the other 5, except Dee, never lacked condoms. After 2 weeks of getting to know others, I finally found a time convenient for Dee and me. I immediately booked it, and when I get tested for STDs after my last connection with the last of the other 5, my second meeting with Dee was even better than the first, something I considered unlikely, if not impossible. We made love in the positions of concubine, chairman, and wheelbarrow in addition to numerous hugs, conversations, and bed. Not only was he amazing, the best in my life, but I really felt connected to her, and I think she felt oneness with me. Over the next 4 months, my life changed from the longest period of lull in my adult life to the most varied and intense love-making I've ever had. If I could go condom-free with a C, E, and F, I would probably die from overstimulation. I had at least 3 meetings a week with one or the other, and as many with D as was possible given our schedule. I'm not sure of the exact date or why, but I suddenly felt like I needed to know who these girls were. I think it was after Dee left one night and I realized that I might be in love with her, even though I had never seen her face or heard her real voice. As soon as I came to the conclusion that I needed to find out who they were, I felt like a bloodhound. At every party or event I went to, I carefully studied all the women present there. I gave a gift, usually jewelry, to each one when they left my house. The ones Dee had were expensive, hoping that they might stumble and wear them to some event. And I even used my computer abilities to crack the personnel information about the wives of all employees. I actually determined that C is the pretty Debbie Ritchie, the wife of one of my colleagues. I saw her at the gym, where it was possible to determine her body type quite clearly. Her reaction to me when we were talking also gave away she was too friendly and smiling. When we were talking, although I didn't seem to know her very well outside my bedroom, She also didn't see how I stole a glance at her when she came out of the gym and street clothes, and with one of the bracelets I gave her on her left wrist. Although I never told Debbie that I knew who she was, my discovery led me to believe that all 6 mysterious girls were the wives of my colleagues, perhaps the wives of the townspeople. It drove me crazy that I couldn't accurately identify the other 5 girls except Debbie, especially since it had huge balls, and especially Dee, because by that time I knew every inch of her body better than any other woman in my life. After 2 months of fruitless searching, I decided to just enjoy life and forget about it. I had about a month left on my contract, and I had already been given another assignment. When I learned from rumors that 2 of my colleagues were having marital difficulties, as mentioned earlier, the wives' lives were not easy, as they had almost nothing to do. I came to the conclusion that mysterious girls were created specifically for arousal. Shortly after I learned about the 2 cases of marital disharmony, I had another session with Dee. Dee has always been known for her unsurpassed zeal, but this time she surpassed even herself. When we were well advanced again after the 2-hour session for which we were contracted, the common thing for most, but always with Dee, she sat me down on the couch in my living room. Brock, she began, calling me by my first name the only time I could remember. I know you're leaving in about a month. What are your plans after that? Well, I'm going to take a 2-week vacation in Hawaii and then start my next project in Washington, D.C. Why are you asking? Deposed for a long time. Sighed, then said, I have a connection with you, and I think you have a connection with me. I want to go on vacation with you, and if something works out, I want to go to Washington with you. I saved all the money you paid me so I could pay for my flight to Hawaii, and like I said, then we'll see what happens. Are you married? Yes, but my marriage is falling apart, not because of you, but my relationship with you has made it clear to me that my life does not necessarily have to be devoid of any spark or passion as it is now. I don't think I'll last another 6 months with my husband, and of course if I go to Hawaii with you, it'll be over? I hesitated, but only because I let my feelings for Dee overwhelm me. I was actually head over heels in love with her. She mistook my contemplation for a bad feeling and felt obliged to continue. I understand that you need to know who I am before you can seriously consider my offer. So let's go, Dee said, pulling off her wig. I didn't protest for about 2 minutes, which it took her to completely remove her wig and mask. As soon as she did, I recognized her. It was Carolyn Litton, the wife of one of my colleagues. She has a pretty face and beautiful dark hair that fell down her neck almost to her shoulders. When I saw the face, I wondered why I hadn't guessed who she was before, but I smiled when I recognized her. Although I didn't know her very well outside of my bedroom, I really liked what I knew about her. Carolyn, I smiled. You're beautiful. If you're really going to leave your husband anyway, I really want you to come to Hawaii with me. But at my expense, save your money. She got up, sat on my lap, and we kissed on the lips for the first time. The first kiss was short and sweet. The second was long and passionate. The third was loving. We talked about the future. We decided it would be better if we didn't tell anyone else about what was going on, except our best friend. She objected. We decided to send her most important things with the exception of clothes and jewelry, which she was going to take with her to Hawaii to my company's office in Washington, D.C. for storage. This was nothing new for our organization, nothing special. I just told them that these were my things. We agreed on another session a week before we left, and I told her that I would stop using the services of other mysterious girls. She surprised me with her next comment. Although, as soon as we go to Hawaii, I would like to be alone with you. But now could you do me a favor? Of course, I smiled. One of the others is also leaving her husband, and she really, really likes you. While others just like you, they only do it for the sake of excitement and extra lovemaking. But for one of them, it's more meaningful, and she's really my good friend. Could you keep making love to her until we leave? Who is this? She's on the C in our photo collection. You mean Debbie Ritchie? How did you find out? Carolyn asked. She's the only one of you I figured out. Yes, if that's what you really want, I'll keep entertaining her. However, it should be free and without condoms. We can both get tested for STDs. Will it work? I'm sure that's gonna happen. I'll talk to her. And now that you know who I am, I'll call you from a landline payphone. We kissed again. Then Carolyn left. That night I got the best sleep I've had since I can remember. Carolyn called me on my cell phone the next day. Debbie enthusiastically supports this proposal. Can she come to your house on Thursday evening around 8 o'clock with her STD test? That would be great, I replied. But are you sure that's okay with you? I'm ready to start an exclusive relationship with you right now. Debbie is my best friend, and maybe on the way to Vancouver early next month. I'll tell you all about it. She chuckled. So it's a lot more than just okay for me. We chatted a little more. I called her a goddess, and we parted. By Thursday morning, I had received another good STD test. However, Thursday turned out to be a hard day, and I was completely exhausted by the time I got home shortly before 8 p.m. I wanted to cancel the meeting with Debbie. I was so exhausted, but I really didn't know how to contact her when she showed up at 8. Sharp with a radiant smile, an expression of pure anticipation on her face, and the full result of the STD test. I didn't have the heart to postpone. I let Debbie in, and she immediately pulled my head down to her and kissed me passionately. Our first lip-to-lip kiss. After chatting for a while, I told her that I had had a hard, tiring day. She promised to make everything better. I needed to take a shower, and she was happy to join me. Despite my fatigue, she played with my foreskin, and my little soldiers stood at attention. It was too uncomfortable to make love in the shower, but after we dried off, we immediately went to bed. I licked Debbie, and as I did, my energy returned just a little bit. After my fingers, tongue, and lips complimented her, I lifted her body and inserted my bolt. For the first time without a condom, into the hole. I really can't explain why, but the fact that my bolt was au natural when I entered her made penetration definitely more enjoyable than I expected, or than she expected given the chirping sound she was making. Since the mink was the tightest I've ever had in my life, I took my time sticking my bolt in so as not to hurt it. However, once I was fully submerged, I started spinning with the power of a diesel engine. Cylinder. Even though Debbie had at least 3 pleasures before I was ready, for some reason I lasted longer than I could remember for the first act, especially with a beautiful partner. Perhaps it was because of my overwork over the past day, an acute desire to prolong it as long as possible because unlike other mysterious girls, Debbie was usually suitable for only one lovemaking, or maybe there was some other reason. Regardless of the reason, when my balls started to boil, Debbie experienced the most intense buy in order of magnitude. High since I've known her, and mine was as powerful as anything I've ever experienced. By the time the last drop of seminal fluid had penetrated her, Debbie was in a comatose state. Once I determined that she was breathing normally and her condition was caused only by the fact that the chains had burned out from the force of my ejaculation, I caressed her small asymmetrical balls with hypersensitive balls while my bolt was still in her. However, after only a few minutes, fatigue overcame me and I left. Although Debbie seemed comatose, she pressed her little body against mine and we immediately fell asleep in the spoon position. The next time I opened my eyes, it seemed to me that the sun was trying to look out and shine through the bedroom window facing the east side. I was still in exactly the same position that I felt I was sleeping in. Debbie's waist was pressed against my crotch, and one of my hands was on her nearest balloon. My bolt was starting to react to her waist pressing against it. I decided that I must be dreaming about the sunrise and being the fiend that I am. I immediately began to inject the now solid into her Debbie in the same spoon position. After a couple of inches of penetration, Debbie seemed to come to life and strained her LC muscles with all her might while I stroked her leisurely. In and out, the simultaneous pleasures that soon engulfed us were not intense and exhausting like the previous time. They were slow, serene, and prolonged. Debbie was making little moaning noises, and at the same time I was making moaning noises. It took a good half hour before we parted, but by that time it was clear that it was morning. Debbie unintentionally spent the night at my place. Debbie, I said, gently shaking her after my pleasant moment had passed. It's already morning. Will that be a problem for you? Debbie moved away from me and took the watch from the bedside table next to her. Damn, it's 642 and Rick, her husband, is coming home from his night shift this week. Around 620. It looks like the shit is going to hit the mark, but I feel so good that it's worth it, she continued, trying to make a smile. She jumped out of bed, took her cell phone out of her purse, and checked her messages. Suddenly, her expression changed from worried to happy. Thank God, she chuckled. He texted me at 6 o'clock that there was an emergency and he would most likely not be home until 9 o'clock. I'll tell him that I just got up. After she texted Rick, she put her cell phone back in her purse and I jumped off the bed and grabbed her. It means we have time for another fantastic lovemaking. I grinned, hugging her. Oh, please, Brock, don't fuck with me. My mink hurts so much. Next time I'll bring some special cream and you can have me 3 times. Damn, look what your beautiful body and image have done to my hose, I said, pulling away from her and pointing to my red bolt, which was a little sore, but had already come back to life. I can take care of that, she chuckled. Just lie on your back. Debbie continued to give me a wonderful, enjoyable moment, during which she also sometimes played with the foreskin and always seemed to have at least one hand on the testicle. When I warned her that I was going to let her down, she just continued to fondle and swallowed my entire portion. When we took a shower together, I demanded that Debbie let me wash her completely and took full advantage of the situation by stroking her anus, rubbing and sucking on super sensitive little balls and massaging her shoulders. I left the inflamed mink alone, apart from a gentle wash. She said she would take a shower as soon as she got home. When she left, we had another passionate kiss. I had breakfast and got ready for work. The fatigue of the previous evening was replaced by the fact that a beautiful little mink took out my ashes and I was strengthened by a good night's sleep. The rest of the month passed pretty quickly. Carolyn and I didn't make love anymore, but we made love once a week and I talked to her on the phone every day. Our conversations, when we both put our heads on pillows or talked on the phone, were uninhibited and meaningful. I became more and more confident that she and I had a real future together. Last month, I also had Debbie 2 nights a week. It was purely an entertainment process, and a very good one at that. She was the only person who knew that Carolyn and I were going to Hawaii together and would try to establish a long-term relationship. However, she did not hesitate to tell me that she was going to divorce Rick soon and that, if Carolyn had not claimed me yet, she would do her best to get me to take her with me. By myself. I told her that she was amazing and beautiful and that it wouldn't be difficult for her to find someone who would really appreciate her. Carolyn and I planned to leave on Saturday morning. She pretended to leave with Debbie, who was supposed to take her to the nearest bus station on Thursday, but after they drove around the neighborhood for a while, Debbie dropped her off about 100 meters from my back door, hiding in the woods so no one would see Carolyn enter. That Thursday night, Carolyn and I spent the night together for the first time, and it was magical. He was amazing and unhurried, but what was more important was the strong feelings we had for each other. On Friday, I attended my farewell party in between 2 shifts at the facility. Everyone was friendly, even Carolyn and Debbie's husbands, who, of course, had no idea that I had their wives. I made one last attempt to find out who the mysterious girls B, E, and F are, but to no avail. I left the party as soon as it became appropriate for me, saying that I needed to get up early to go to Vancouver and spend another wonderful night of love with Carolyn. Carolyn and I set off on a roughly 700-kilometer, 400-mile journey to Vancouver a little after 6 a.m. on Saturday. We talked about a lot, but I was determined to learn as much as I could about the mystery girls. So after a short stop for brunch, I said, "Okay, Carolyn, you promised to tell me about the mystery girls, so start spilling it. What do you want to know? That's all you're ready to tell me, but let's start with how many clients you had." "Only one, you," she chuckled. What? I thought she was joking. Let me tell you how it started, then maybe you'll believe me. It should be delicious. I laughed. As you know, my wife's life in this institution was unbearably boring. We had nowhere to work. There were no worries. We had little rest with our husbands. There was nowhere to go. Debbie and I quickly became best friends, and we got along great with most wives, and often played cards just to chat and pass the time. We all started exercising regularly, as the gym was almost the newest in the city and better than could be expected for a city with a population of 1 in 100 people, and we all started to get in the best shape of our lives. However, there is only one problem with intense exercise. She chuckled. What is it? I kept a straight face. This leads to a sharp increase in libido, and our out-of-shape, hard-working husbands could not cope with this job. However, there wasn't much choice because the townspeople weren't particularly desirable. And as you could easily see, none of the single men among the workers were even close to handsome. And then you came along. She grinned. What do you mean? Appeared? Tall, handsome, fully fit and charming single guy. Debbie and I admitted that we had wet panties next to you. So we tried to keep our distance and admire you from afar. After a while, when our already bad marriages started to crack more and more, Debbie and I decided that we wanted to give you a try. So we came up with the idea of mysterious ones who hoped to seduce you. We decided that we wouldn't look legitimate if there were only two of us, so we probed the others very, very carefully. B, E, and F were the only ones to whom we disclosed our plan, because in the course of our research and discussions, we came to the conclusion that other wives would not show interest in us, or we did not trust them. Surprisingly, all at B, E, and F agreed on the condition that either Debbie or I contact you first and tell you if it was worth it. Are you going to tell me who B, E, and F are? I asked, wiggling my eyebrows. Hell no, she laughed. They would have killed me. Well, let me ask one question about them. However, although I'm not really surprised that I never found out who B, E, and F are, but I'm annoyed that I couldn't figure out who was given such convex balls as stated. I'm shaking my head again. Pervert, she laughed. Okay, I'll tell you about it. A is a married townswoman. Debbie got to know her really well while doing volunteer work in elementary school, and they often expressed condolences about their unrealized libido. You mean she's a teacher? Yes, the elementary school is small. So there are only 4 teachers, each of whom teaches in 2 grades from the 1st to the 8th. And after that, the children have to take the bus 3 days a week to the high school, located 30 miles away, and study online for 2 days. She is a teacher of the 3rd and 4th grades. You're right that with the F-size balls on her skinny body. If you ever met her, you'd easily find out who she is. So we did our best to make sure you never met. That solves one mystery, I smiled. But it's still hard to believe that you've arranged this whole mystery girls thing just for me. We did it because you were the only man in the neighborhood that any of the 6 of us married to was willing to risk sleeping with. In addition, we knew from our sources, which I will also not disclose, that you were unhappy with the lack of desirable female companionship. Besides, we knew your schedule. So we set it up so that if you answer our email, you'll choose either me or Debbie. Our plan was for Debbie or me to test and inform the others who were not yet sure if they would go for it. But at least we're willing to take nude photos in a mask and wigs. Well, I guess I was lucky that my first session was so exciting. Wasn't it? I laughed. I think so, she laughed back. Of course, I gave legitimate rave reviews, so they all wanted to try it. And at the risk of inflating your ego excessively, they were all very happy with their meetings. In fact, they were very angry with me for making you see only Debbie and me last month. They all wanted to meet you goodbye. Is that all you want to say? I asked skeptically. I'm sorry, but yes, although there is one more tidbit that I can add. Debbie and I fell in love with you. Others really liked you, but they had no intention of leaving their husbands. They just needed an extra and great relaxation. Would Debbie really have tried to talk me into running away with her instead of you? Hell, yes. The deal I made with her to get the little bitch to back off was to encourage you to have her twice a week for the last month. You know, I fell in love with you, not her, and I would never run away with her instead of you. I smiled. I was hoping that, but I didn't want to take any chances, and I knew that if Debbie gave me her word, she would back down. She backed off, didn't she? Yeah, she did. And words. I really got the impression that if I changed my mind myself, she would really be happy about it. But as I said, I love you, and although I like her and it was fun in bed with her, I don't love her and never will. That night we got to Vancouver, spent another night of love in a hotel, and the next day, flew to Hawaii. We boarded the plane without any encumbrances. Hawaii was all we hoped for. Although we already knew we were 100% compatible, we found that we really enjoy being together, outside of bed almost as much as we do in it. I realized that we had a future together when one evening, instead of going out to dinner and dancing, we cooked dinner together in the apartment. We rented and just hugged and watched a meaningless comedy on TV. It was almost as much fun as making love, and probably even more loving. Carolyn moved with me to DC. She got a job in her old field of public relations, and we got married a couple of months after. Her divorce was final. The epilogue. I never worried about Carolyn because she cheated on her first husband, because I don't share the philosophy of once a cheater is always a cheater. However, she worried about it and constantly tried to calm me down in our first 6 months in DC until I finally told her stop, that I completely trust her. Now it's been 12 years, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a 5-bedroom house in the suburbs. We're more in love with each other than we were in Hawaii. Surprisingly, when I look back at my impressive satisfaction in British Columbia with mysterious girls, despite how wonderful that time was for me, I would not trade a single second of my current happy life for a return. Debbie, who has never married again, but has now become even more beautiful, has visited us many times over the years, but Carolyn made it very clear to her, you can look but not touch when it comes to me. Carolyn didn't have to do this because I will always be faithful to her, but the fact that she cares enough to warn her friend gives me inner peace.